Hi, my name is Sam Led, and welcome to The Fearless Now. This is for you in the nosebleed seats, if you're looking for an easier way to approach anxiety, stress, and unhealthy habits from the inside out. There's no techniques and no strategies, so sit back, relax, and let me be your peace of mind Uber driver, here on The Fearless Now. Welcome to the Fearless Now podcast. My name is Sam Led. I'm a transformational coach, and this is episode number 17. And we're going to talk about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, otherwise known as ADHD, or when I grew up, it was ADD, and then there was ADD with hyperactivity. I was diagnosed with, I believe it was ADD, but I wasn't hyperactive, which leads me to how uncomfortable I was initially of putting together this episode and sharing this with you. Because I've struggled with ADHD most of my life. And for the first, I would say, 18 years of my life, I didn't even know what was going on. I had some learning disabilities, but I still did well in school. I still persevered. I still graduated college, but I had to work extra hard to make it through certain coursework, especially math. To this day, I have nightmares of finite math and calculus. I wake up in a cold sweat sometime thinking about, how, God, studying for those exams and failing, flunking them just because I just couldn't focus. And I had no attention span to sit there doing equations, especially geometry and quadratic equations. Absolutely hated it, but it goes beyond that because I always struggle to understand what ADHD is. Is it real? I mean, there are people with certain clusters of behaviors or neurochemistry sets that are similar, right? Inattention, overstimulation, hyperfocusing. We forget things. We go from one topic to the other. We get overstimulated very easily. Some of us have short triggers and get angry easily because our mind is overloaded with a lot of noise and stimuli all at once, that our neural wiring is plugged into the wrong places. But for me, I didn't think really that there was anything wrong with me. I just thought I just was misunderstood growing up. And then when I was officially diagnosed about 22 years ago, in my young adult years, my early 20s, I then began to see what ADHD was and how it was impacting my life. So this is podcast episode, and bear with me because I'm probably going to stutter a lot over different areas of this, because it's uncomfortable for me still. And there's been a lot of, I try to work really hard to compensate for when I have an ADD moment, as I call it. A lot of folks that have ADHD or ADD, we have our frailties. We all have our unique set of frailties as human beings. But I want to talk about ADHD as it applies to the understanding of the three principles that I discuss and share with you that was discovered by this brilliant Scottish mystic, Sydney Banks, that had this epiphany, like all great sages, all great soothsayers, all great prophets, that we are not our thinking, that we have this divine design of inner knowing, inner intelligence within us that is beneath our thinking. Some people call it intuition. When we get really quiet, there's this flow state. Our inner knowing is not our thinking, that we don't have ownership of our thoughts. Now, ADHD is a thought-related kind of disorder, right? Well, see, there's where I get uncomfortable calling it a disorder. Like there was something disorderly with me. There's something wrong with me. Or anybody that suffers from any diagnostic label, ADHD or I don't know, name that acronym for whatever is going on in the DSM-5 Diagnostic Statistical Manual. And I'm not going to get on my soapbox, and that's not the purpose of this podcast. But if we're going to look at ADHD in a different way, that ADHD doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. It's made up. Yes, it's a thought system, a thought program that's running in the background, a thought floppy disk program that is influenced by neurochemistry. We can go into the neurochemistry, and I'm not an expert in it. I don't claim to be an expert in any of this. I'm not a therapist. I don't want to be a therapist, but I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychologist. I don't claim to be an expert in any of this. But what I do know is my own experience with ADHD and how I see it differently, and when I see it differently through the lens of the three principles, through mind, thought, and consciousness, it really helps me to get through the day without stumbling and tripping over my ADD moments, my attentiveness, or be forgetting things, or being overstimulated, or hyper focusing, or interrupting people, or talking out of turn if I'm in a conversation with somebody, or just forgetting to call someone back, or forgetting my wallet, or losing my wallet 3 times, 4 times a week, and innocently losing my wallet 3 times a week to no fault of my own, just having an ADD moment. But when I really looked at ADHD as a playlist of thought and thinking, a floppy disk of conditioned thinking, yeah, maybe I was born with my neural wiring plugged into some of the wrong ports in my supercomputer, in my brain, that there are areas of my brain that are really, really brilliant and powerful. And there are other areas like attention and memory that are don't work as well. And so, but what ends up happening is that when we are labeled with this diagnosis, even as young kids, and again, I'm not poo-pooing or dismissing psychologists or therapists or saying that they're terrible people or anything. No, therapists are wonderful people, and they're very helpful, and they improve people's lives twofold. I still see a therapist outside of my 3Ps coach and mentor. Hey, Angus, how you doing? Anyways, I'm a complete proponent for therapy. But what I have a problem with is when we label this thought train, this thought program floppy disks called ADHD that have been inserted into our supercomputer, that we're reminded that we have a disorder called ADHD. It reinforces it over decades because our mind is a sponge. It takes in stimuli, and it's like a tape recorder. It stores it in the cells. We know that. That's a fact. That's a truth. So I'm going to get off my bully pulpit and kind of share with you how I've looked at my own frailties or my own struggles with ADHD, not from a weakness or a frailty, but then when I see it as a thought program that I've reinforced over the years, over the decades, due to conditioning what I was told from therapists and from teachers, all well-meaning, all wanted the best for me. But I was told that my ADHD, I would never get over it. I would never be cured. Like I needed to be cured for my own natural mind's way of processing stimuli, right? For better or for worse, that it was an impairment, that I would have to take medication the rest of my life. And yeah, medication does help for some people. And therapy can help with the overstimulation and the reactivity sometimes that a lot of folks with ADHD can suffer from. But when I really looked at it, when a couple years ago, when I was introduced to the three principles and started sharing it with my clients and started sharing it with my friends and just started sharing it on my videos and on Facebook and Instagram, I then started to see what it was for me, ADHD. I kind of created my own sense of meaning around ADHD. So for what we know and what I've experienced with ADHD, and everyone's ADHD or ADD is very different, that for me, there's like always a playlist of sound, of stimuli playing in the background. Now, what I mean by that, so my mind is very sensitive. I have a very sensitive brain. My mind will pick up stimuli from everywhere. Car horns, people talking in the periphery, the neighbor next door talking loudly or their TV playing in the background. And instead of me seeing it as, okay, it's just background noise, my mind would hyper focus on the background noise instead of focusing on what I was doing in front of me. Okay, I call it like wow and flutter, multipath distortion. It was that I would get distracted by the background noise. I still get distracted and it doesn't go away. I get distracted all the time by background noise. And for me, ADHD has been kind of like, if I can describe it, what it's like my mind is like a lint brush, the lint being outside noise or lights, sound. Think about a car horn or the neighbor next door talking or playing their TV loud, or it could be anything. My mind, it would be like, a lint brush picking up all that stimuli all at once, right? Blaring, it would get really loud. And then if I already had a song in my head from, say, 2 days ago, the song would be playing as well. So I would hear the song, just say like I was listening to Pink Floyd and Wish You Were Here. That would be going on in the background. And then I'd be hearing the car horns, the neighbor's TV, my partner making a shake in the background. And then the replay of the song would keep going over and over again. And that's what I would be focusing on over and over and over again. That's kind of what my ADHD was. And it was reinforced and amplified by my unique set of neural wiring. Kind of my neural wiring was plugged into some wrong places, I would say, because I would be focusing on what was going on in the periphery and not focusing on my task at hand. I was getting distracted, even if it was subtle. There could be a gentleman walking his child in a baby carriage, or kids playing across the street, or just a car driving down the street that was shiny red. If I saw the shiny red car in the corner of my eye, I'd all of a sudden take my attention off of what I was doing and hyper focus on the car innocently. Not because I wanted to look at whatever car was out there, but the stimuli was like lint on a lint brush. It picked up everything. But then after medication, after therapy, medication quieted down the noise. Yeah, it worked with side effects. But what I realized was, instead of trying to calm the noise down with medication or try to fix my quote unquote disorder with behavior modification or just refocusing my attention using techniques or behavioral modification, I made peace with it. I made peace with all that distraction. And when that noise got really loud, all the stuff going on behind me, it could even be like, I could be looking at the banana next to me and I'd be like hyper focusing on the brown speckles in between, on ripe banana that I'm looking at right now, actually, or my rose quartz right here. It didn't matter what it was. But instead of trying to fix what really wasn't broken, is just how my brain was formed, how I was born, right? And realizing I can't change how my mind really works. It's a part of me. Even when all the doctors and therapists, well-meaning, they wanted to help me, told me that I'd have to live with it, take medication, and that it'd be disruptive and an impairment, and I'd have to work extra hard, which I did, that it was a disability. That's when it got even louder. And the medication really stopped working, believe it or not. And family and friends would encourage me and say, having an ADD mind was really a blessing as well, because you could multitask and do multiple things at the same time, and you had more energy and blah, 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 blah. That didn't help either. In fact, that made it even louder. So thinking about my history with this made up disorder that a bunch of people in white lab coats 80 years ago, 70 years ago, put it, maybe I don't even think ADHD has been out. The diagnosis has been around for probably more than 50 years, probably since the early 70s. So thinking like, the ADHD was discovered, or the label came from a bunch of nerdy psychologists or therapists sitting in a stuffy room with white lab coats, all coming together to figure out what to label this cluster of behaviors. I decided to really question whether this was actually real or not. And because I'm not ADHD, I'm not inattentive, I'm not impulsive, I'm not overstimulated all the time. That the noise in the background is not there all the time. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes I'm at utter peace. Sometimes I'm just Sam, not in my thinking. So how is that possible? I'm diagnosed with ADHD, which means that it's a disorder. I have an impairment. I'm going to have to be on medication. All these things that I've been told over the decades, like a lot of us have that were diagnosed, especially if we were diagnosed early on in the early days of finding out what this disorder was, well, quote unquote disorder. I really questioned, like, this is just thinking and thought. Yeah, it's amplified because the wires might be plugged into the wrong places in my brain. Perhaps. We don't even know. But maybe it's just another floppy disk program that us ADDers have been habituated to over decades. But then I really saw it. I really saw my thinking. I really saw the noise as just noise. And knowing that there's nothing I could do to quiet it down, I made peace with it. I mean, I can hear the noise right now. I could tell you what song's playing right now in the background. It's a terrible song. It's an old 80s Daryl Hall and John Oates song. Good album though. But I made peace with it. I made peace with it not by surrendering to my ADHD, but when the noise gets really loud, the background noise gets really, really loud and I can't focus, I say to myself, oh yeah, man, that noise is loud. I need some noise reduction. I just notice it. I just see my mind getting distracted by the background noise. And the more I see it, the more I label it and identify it. The car outside honking its horn and my mind gets completely attached to that red Mercedes driving down the street, right? Or something flashes on my social media feed and I can't stop doing it. I see, oh yeah, I'm caught up. I'm caught up in an ADD thought loop. It becomes less of a big deal. It really does. I nip it in the butt. When I get overstimulated, I take a 10-minute break. When I forget shit, I forget shit. No biggie. And the important shit that I forget, I put it in a conspicuous place. I put a Post-it note under it. Say, I can't, I still lose my wallet, but I put stuff in places where I know it's going to be there and I memorize it. No big deal. Now, the biggest thing, and again, I'm not diminishing how much people suffer with ADHD. I've suffered and I sometimes still suffer, but then I don't suffer. And then I suffer again, but then I don't suffer. But just knowing that it's just a thought program running through me, that the noise will stop. It can't go on forever. I mean, I'm talking to you right now, and that Daryl Hall and John Oates song that was playing in the back of my mind stopped. So the 3 Ps have been so helpful because when I realized that I'm not the noise, I'm not the sum total of all those ADHD thoughts, that it's just ADHD dysregulated thoughts moving through me. And when I can label it as sad, I'm better able to make it a big deal. And the more that I make it not a big deal, and it becomes less of a thing, and it's just a thing that I have, I'm better able to cope with it. Yeah, I might still lose my wallet. I might still lose my keys. I might forget to, God forbid, lock the door to my house sometimes, but I'm really good. The odds of me forgetting to lock the door of my house are much less because I nip it in the bud, because I notice it. I notice the forgetfulness. I take note of it, and I try to do my best to make sure it doesn't happen as much, but it's going to happen. And once I make peace with it, knowing that it might happen sometimes, the less it becomes a big deal and the noise gets quieter and quieter. It used to be that the ADHD noise in the background was like an 8 or a 9. It was really, really annoying and disruptive. And now it's kind of, it vacillates between maybe 4 and 6. And I'm off medication. I don't need to take any of that anymore because, when I saw the silence, when I saw that I was not suffering all the time or not getting distracted by the noise, I call the ADHD wow and flutter noise in the background, I saw something. It was the space in between the noise. It was the quiet, the calm, like the calm right now in the space between my words right now, talking to all of you. That seeing the silence amidst the ADHD noise did not calm down the intrusive noise. I just stopped giving it meaning. I just stopped taking it really seriously, the noise. I stopped turning it into a thing. I stopped telling myself that my ADHD was who I am, what I was scorned with, something that I'd have to live with for the rest of my life. Oh my God, that's so heavy, right? How about, I sometimes get distracted, but when I see it as, oh, I'm distracted, I give myself a hard stop. Oh, I'm distracted by that red car right now. Hard stop. And then I turn back to my work. That's it. Now, I've been very lucky. I've been very lucky because as a practitioner of these 3 principles, as someone who is very mindful and very aware, just through seeing thought and thinking for what it is, I've been able to see my ADHD for what it is. But it wasn't always like that. And when the mind gets in the way, when the ego gets in the way, ego telling you, medication might help. You should listen to that doctor. Or you need to do something about this ADHD because it's going to wreck your life. And it has wrecked my life, but I picked it back up again. I fixed it by seeing it for what it is. It's just another thought train. I can call it a brilliant brain with neural wiring in the wrong places. You can call it whatever you want. But at the end of the day, after this entire episode is over, it's not real. It's made up. It's just thought. It really is just thought. Your mind's going to question what I'm saying right now. It's going to judge what I'm saying right now. It's going to question what I'm saying right now. It's going to say, what does this guy know? He's not a therapist. He's not a professional. Well, I can tell you from my own experience living with this for decades, for most of my life, that just like any other thought train, any other thought program floppy disk that's been inserted into the hard drive of our supercomputer called our brain, just like this floppy disk or the app that's been inserted into our computer and the program that it's running, you can always eject it. And every time I see my mind going elsewhere, call it mind wandering, like I'm a mind wanderer, getting distracted, when I see it, I just say, oh, I'm getting distracted. Oh, I'm looking at that red car again. It makes it less of a big deal. And I turn back to my work. Does it work all the time? No. Is this a technique or is it going to solve all your ADHD conundrums? Absolutely not. But when we stop looking at it as a problem, we stop looking at our ADHD as a disorder, we stop looking at it as a major problem or a major issue, the less it becomes an issue. Because that's just another thought program. And it's all made up. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I hope it's been helpful. This podcast is made possible by all of you in the nosebleed seats. Please like and subscribe. Tell your friends and they can tell your friends. And I would love this podcast to be available to people that really need it. So please, I need your support. Like and subscribe and comment. This podcast is available on Apple and Spotify and Google. I will see you for episode number 18. Don't give up for another episode of the Fearless Now podcast.